I had just closed a deal that pushed our company's valuation to $75 million when my father called me into his office. Expecting congratulations, I was blindsided when he smirked and said, "Your brother will be taking over now." This is a story of ambition, betrayal, and the quest for identity within a family business. Before we get into the story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I grew up surrounded by the sound of power drills, saws, and the distant hum of construction sites. My father, Richard Thompson, built Thompson Builders from nothing, starting with a single truck and a handful of workers. He poured every ounce of his sweat into that company, and as a kid, I watched him come home exhausted, smelling like sawdust and cement, his shirt permanently stained with dirt and grease. He wasn't the kind of father who played catch in the backyard or read bedtime stories. His way of showing love was making sure we had food on the table and a roof over our heads. And I admired him. Maybe that's why I worked so hard. I wanted to be the kind of man he respected. By the time I was 10, I could tell the difference between drywall and plywood. At 13, I spent my summers hauling lumber and fetching coffee for the foreman. While other kids played video games, I studied blueprints and listened in on my dad's conversations with contractors. He never asked me to, never even acknowledged that I was there half the time. But I wanted to prove to him that I was paying attention, that I was serious about the business. I had a younger brother, Ryan, 3 years my junior, and he couldn't have been more different from me. Where I was focused and determined, Ryan was relaxed. He coasted through life, flashing an easy smile and getting by on charm alone. He was the kid who forgot his homework at school but somehow convinced the teacher to give him an extension. The guy who could show up to a party uninvited and still be the life of it. Dad never pressured him the way he did me. Or maybe that was the problem. Dad never pressured Ryan at all. When I graduated college with a degree in business administration, I walked straight into Thompson Builders, ready to earn my place. I didn't expect handouts. I didn't want them. I started at the bottom, working on site, driving trucks, running errands, whatever needed to be done. Earning your way up wasn't just a phrase my father liked to throw around, it was a rule. One I followed to the letter. And I did it well. By the time I was 25, I had already secured several major contracts that brought in millions. I streamlined operations, improved worker efficiency, and introduced new project management systems. I made the company money, a lot of it. Still, my father remained distant. One night, after we finished a massive commercial project downtown, I sat across from him at the dinner table. He had a glass of whiskey in one hand, flipping through paperwork with the other. I cleared my throat. "We closed on the Baxter deal," I said, watching him closely. $17 million. Should be our biggest profit margin this year. He didn't even look up. Just took a slow sip of his drink. "Good," he muttered. "Keep it up." That was it. No "well done, son," or "I'm proud of you," just 2 words before he went back to his paperwork. I should have been used to it by then. I was used to it. But I hated that it still stung. Ryan, meanwhile, was off in Miami, living off our father's money, pretending to find himself. He hadn't worked a single day in the company. Hell, I wasn't even sure he knew how to read a blueprint. But that didn't matter to Dad. He never expected Ryan to carry the business. That was supposed to be my job. At least, that's what I thought. For years, I told myself that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself, Dad would finally see me as his successor. I spent a decade building his company, pouring everything I had into it. And in the end, none of it mattered. I spent years working harder than anyone else at Thompson Builders. I wasn't just proving myself to my father, I was proving myself to me. I needed to know that I deserved the spot at the top. My work wasn't just about keeping the company afloat. I was building something bigger. The industry was changing, and I wanted us to be ahead of the curve. I brought in digital project tracking, cut wasteful spending, and made better hires, real pros who knew what they were doing. And the results? Undeniable. We started landing huge projects. We weren't just some mid-sized family business anymore, we were a force. But no matter what I did, my father's attitude never changed. One afternoon, I walked into his office with the numbers from a massive deal I had just closed. A new commercial development contract downtown, one that would double our profits for the year. I handed him the folder. "Signed, sealed, and delivered," I said, keeping my voice light. You're looking at 35 million in new revenue. Dad flipped through the papers, eyes scanning over the numbers. I waited for some kind of reaction. A smile. A nod. Something. Instead, he just set the papers down. You know we've got supply chain issues coming up, he said flatly. You need to start focusing on logistics. That was it. Not great work, son. Not you're doing an incredible job. Just another thing to worry about. I left his office furious. I had done everything right. I had taken this company to heights it had never seen before, and he still treated me like some entry-level worker. I walked straight into the break room, pacing like a caged animal. That's when Emily found me. Emily had been my best friend since college. Smart, no nonsense, and the only person I could trust to tell me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. She took one look at me and sighed. Let me guess, she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. You made the company another fortune, and your dad acted like it was nothing? I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. I don't get it, Em. What more does he want from me? She gave me a look, the kind that said she'd been waiting for me to ask this question for years. He doesn't want more from you, Alex, she said simply. This is just who he is. You could make him a billionaire, and he'd still find something to criticize. I shook my head. No. That's not how this works. I hesitated. I need to earn it. He built this company from nothing. He respects hard work. I just have to prove I'm the right person to take over. Emily let out a soft laugh. Not because she thought it was funny, because she thought I was delusional. Alex, you've already proven it 100 times over, she said. If he hasn't acknowledged it by now, maybe he never will. I hated hearing that. Because deep down, I knew she was right. But I wasn't ready to accept it. I kept pushing. Kept working harder. Kept making this company money. And then, Ryan came back. After years of partying, traveling, and burning through Dad's money, my little brother suddenly decided he wanted to be part of the business. At first, I thought it was a joke. Ryan? The guy who never worked a day in his life? The guy who once crashed Dad's truck into a golf course and just laughed about it? Now he wanted to be in construction? I expected Dad to shut him down immediately. Instead he said, "It's about time." I almost laughed out loud. Ryan waltzed into the office like he owned the place. No years of grinding. No starting from the bottom. Just walked in, got a desk, and started sitting in on meetings like he belonged there. I tried to let it go. I told myself it didn't matter. Ryan wasn't serious about this. He never took anything seriously. He'd get bored and move on to something else, just like he always did. But then Dad started giving him responsibilities. Real ones. At first, it was small stuff, shadowing managers, sitting in on contract meetings. But then I started seeing his name on actual projects. And that's when I realized, Dad was grooming him for something. I confronted him about it one night in his office. You really think Ryan has what it takes to run this place? I asked, keeping my voice even. Dad didn't look up from his paperwork. He's learning. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Oh, come on. He doesn't even know how to read a financial statement. Dad sighed, setting down his pen. You were given a chance to learn. Why shouldn't he? I clenched my jaw. Because I had to earn it. His expression didn't change. So will he. I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned and walked out. That night, Emily and I grabbed drinks at a small bar down the street from the office. She listened as I ranted about Ryan, about Dad, about the entire situation. Ryan's gonna screw everything up, I muttered, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Emily gave me a careful look. And what if he doesn't? I blinked. What if he actually does the work? She continued. Would that be the worst thing? I let out a breath. You don't get it, Em. He doesn't care about this place. He's doing it because Dad's letting him. She hesitated. And what if that's not the reason? I shook my head. Then it's still not his to take. Emily didn't push it. She just sighed and finished her drink. 4 months, Ryan stayed in the background, watching, listening, learning. And the whole time, I kept grinding, making sure Thompson Builders stayed at the top. And then, finally, it happened. The moment I'd been waiting for. I closed the biggest deal in company history. A $75 million valuation. The kind of success that should have cemented my place as Dad's successor. I thought this was it. I thought he'd finally see me. But what happened next? I never saw it coming. The deal was done. $75 million. I had spent weeks working on it, late nights, early mornings, endless negotiations. I knew every inch of that contract, every clause, every loophole. When the final signature went through, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't just a win for the company. It was my win. So when I walked into my father's office that afternoon, I wasn't hoping for recognition. I was expecting it. The door was already open. He was sitting at his desk, flipping through a folder, looking over something like it was just another Tuesday. I stood in the doorway, trying to keep my voice calm. It's done. He looked up. The deal, I clarified. $75 million. Signed this morning. He nodded once, barely even a glance at me. Just one quick motion like I'd told him I'd reordered printer paper. Good, he said, turning a page in his folder. Close the door. That should have been my first clue. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. Then I saw Ryan. He was sitting in the chair across from Dad's desk, legs stretched out, arms crossed, a relaxed look on his face, like he already knew what was coming. My stomach twisted. Something was off. Dad leaned back in his chair, resting his hands on the armrests. We need to talk about the future of this company. Finally. I straightened, pushing down the emotions already clawing their way up my throat. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I had built this company into something greater than he ever imagined. And now, he was finally going to acknowledge it. I braced myself. And then, he smirked. Not a proud smile. Not approval. A smirk. And then he said it. Your brother will be taking over now. It took a full 5 seconds for the words to land. I just stood there, staring at him, waiting for him to correct himself. Excuse me. I finally said. Dad's voice was calm, steady, like this was just another decision, like he was telling me he'd picked a new supplier for concrete. Ryan is ready to take on more responsibility. I think it's time he steps into a leadership role. I laughed. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. This is a joke, I said. Right? This is some test or something. Dad's expression didn't change. Ryan just sat there, watching me, the corner of his mouth twitching. I turned back to my father. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about this company, Dad said. I could feel my heart pounding. Ryan doesn't even know how to run a business, I said, my voice rising. He barely understands how we operate, let alone. Dad cut me off. He's learning. And he'll have help. From who? I demanded. Dad exhaled. From you. The room went dead silent. I took a step back. Shook my head. No. No, you can't expect me to, I swallowed hard. I built this company into what it is. I made it worth $75 million. Me. And now you're just handing it over to Ryan. Dad folded his hands together. It was always going to be Ryan. The words hit harder than I was prepared for. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. What? I breathed. Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. It's how it's done, Alex. My father passed it down to me. And in this family, the youngest son inherits the business. I blinked. You're saying this was always the plan? Dad didn't answer right away. I looked at Ryan, expecting him to be just as shocked as I was. But he wasn't. He wasn't surprised at all. Because he had known. All this time. Ryan leaned back in his chair. It's nothing personal, man. Nothing personal. I could barely think straight. My ears were ringing. I turned back to my father, waiting for him to fix this. To say something that made sense. Something that made it okay. But he didn't. He just sat there, completely calm. Like my entire life's work didn't mean a damn thing. My throat was dry when I finally spoke. So that's it? I asked. Everything I've done for this company, it doesn't matter? Dad shook his head. Of course it matters. But this was always the path. Always. The word echoed in my head. I had spent years proving myself. Working harder than anyone else. Carrying this company on my back. And none of it had mattered. Because the decision had been made before I even started. Before I had even tried. Something inside me snapped. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. You know what? I should have seen this coming. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. Alex. But I wasn't listening. I turned to Ryan. You don't deserve this, I said, my voice shaking. You never worked for it. You never cared about it. Ryan didn't even flinch. That's your opinion. I clenched my fists. It wasn't an opinion. It was the truth. And then, Dad delivered the final blow. You'll stay on, of course, he said, as if we were just discussing logistics. Ryan will need guidance, and you're still valuable to the company. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, I got it now. I wasn't being fired. I wasn't being cast aside. I was being kept on as the backup. I had spent my whole life fighting for a place at the top, and now I was just supposed to step aside and play support for my younger brother? No, that wasn't going to happen. I exhaled, steadying myself. Then I looked my father in the eye and said the only thing that made sense anymore. I quit. For the first time in that entire conversation, I saw genuine shock cross his face. Even Ryan looked caught off guard. Dad frowned. Don't be dramatic. I almost laughed again. Dramatic? I shook my head. You don't get it, do you? I don't need this company. Dad studied me for a long moment. Then he said, think it over. But I didn't need to. I turned, walked out of the office, and slammed the door behind me. Emily was sitting outside in the hall, scrolling through her phone. When she saw my face, she stood up immediately. Alex. I kept walking. Alex, what happened? She pressed, catching up to me. I didn't answer. Because if I said it out loud, it would be real. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done. And for the first time in my life, I had no idea what came next. I don't remember driving home. 1 minute, I was walking out of my father's office, my head spinning, my hands shaking. The next, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the wall. Emily was there. I don't even remember letting her in, but she was there. Sitting on the couch across from me, watching me like she was waiting for me to break apart. I probably looked like I was about to. She let me sit in silence for a while. That was one of the things I liked about Emily, she didn't push. She just waited. And finally, I spoke. He was never going to give it to me. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was flat. Hollow. Emily set her phone down. What? I looked at her. My dad. The company. It was always going to Ryan. She frowned. Wait, what do you mean? He just decided. I shook my head slowly. No. It was decided before I even started. Emily blinked, her mouth opening slightly before she shut it again. I exhaled sharply, leaning forward, elbows on my knees. He actually sat there and told me, I went on. It's tradition. The younger son inherits the business. That's just how it's done. Emily looked at me like I'd just spoken another language. Are you serious? I let out a short, humorless laugh. Dead serious. She shook her head. Alex, that's ridiculous. Yeah. I laughed again, but it came out wrong. Like something was caught in my throat. Yeah, it is. She was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, she asked, what did Ryan say? I scoffed. Oh, Ryan? Ryan knew. He's known for God knows how long. He just sat there, all smug, acting like it was nothing personal. Emily's jaw tightened. I mean, I killed myself for this company, I said, my voice rising. I worked day and night. I built it into what it is. And all this time, I thought I was proving something. I thought if I just worked hard enough. I broke off. Emily was still watching me. Her expression softer now. After a moment, she said, you wanted him to be proud of you. Something sharp settled in my chest. I didn't answer. Because I didn't have to. She sighed, leaning back into the couch. Alex. I know this is brutal. And I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but maybe this is a good thing. I snapped my head up. How the hell is this a good thing? She held up her hands. Okay, bad choice of words. I just mean, maybe this is your chance to do something for you. I shook my head. Emily, this was my life. No, she said firmly. This was your father's life. And you were living it for him. I stared at her. Alex. Her voice softened again. What do you want? I blinked. What? She tilted her head slightly. If this wasn't about proving something to your dad, if you never had to think about him or Ryan or any of it, what would you want? I opened my mouth. But no words came out. Because I didn't know. That realization hit harder than anything my father said. For years, my entire identity had been wrapped up in that company. In earning my father's respect. In showing him I was worthy. But now it was gone. And I had nothing left. Emily sighed. Look, I don't expect you to figure everything out in one night. But maybe, just maybe, you don't need Thompson Builders. Maybe you were always meant to do something else. I let out a slow breath. Like what? She gave a small smile. That's up to you. I ran a hand over my face. My head was pounding. My chest felt tight. Emily stood. Come on. Let's get out of here. I frowned. Where? I don't know. Anywhere but here. I almost told her no. But then I realized that if I sat in that apartment any longer, I was going to lose my mind. So I stood. And I walked out the door. I didn't know it then. But that was the moment my real future started. I didn't go back to the office the next day. Or the day after that. At first, I told myself I just needed time to clear my head. That I'd figure out a way to make my father see reason. But the more time passed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to see. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't something I could fix with another late night at the office or another successful deal. My father had already decided. And for the first time in my life, I had to decide what I wanted. Emily was right. I had spent so long chasing his approval that I never stopped to ask myself if I even wanted this. If I wanted to be him. And the truth? I didn't. I didn't want to spend my life in a company where I would always be seen as second best. I didn't want to waste my time building something that would never really be mine. I wanted to build something for myself. So I did. It started small. A simple idea, something I had thought about for years but never considered actually pursuing. Sustainable construction. Green building practices. A way to modernize the industry instead of just chasing contracts and cutting costs like my father did. At first, I worked out of my apartment. Just me, a laptop, and a whiteboard covered in ideas. Emily helped. A lot. She wasn't just a friend, she was a believer. She made calls, helped me network, even threw together a basic website. And slowly, it started to take shape. Investors were interested. Contractors were curious. I started getting meetings with people who actually wanted to listen to my ideas. And for the first time in years, I woke up feeling excited instead of just obligated. Then, 3 months after I walked out of Thompson Builders, my father called. I almost didn't answer. But I did. His voice was tight. Alex. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, glancing at the plans I had just finished sketching out. My plans. About what? I said. There was a long pause. Then, a sigh. It's Ryan. I waited. He's struggling. I didn't say anything. My father continued, his voice lower now. The company isn't where it should be. He's trying but, he exhaled. We're losing clients. Our biggest contract just pulled out. I felt something sharp twist in my chest. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just, inevitability. I had seen this coming. I knew Ryan wasn't built for this. And now? My father knew it too. There was another long pause. Then finally he said, I made a mistake. I closed my eyes. For years, those were the words I had been waiting to hear. The validation I had spent my entire life chasing. And now? They meant nothing. I opened my eyes. Yeah, you did. Another silence. This time, heavier. Then softly he said, I need you, Alex. I let out a slow breath, staring at the plans in front of me. My company. I thought about all the times I had stayed late, pushing myself beyond exhaustion for a father who never once acknowledged it. I thought about every deal, every sleepless night, every sacrifice. And I thought about the last 3 months. How, for the first time in my life, I wasn't just living in his shadow. I was doing something that actually mattered to me. So I made my decision. I lifted the phone back to my ear. I'm sorry, Dad, I said. But I'm not coming back. Silence. Then, a quiet exhale. Not angry. Not bitter. Just accepting. Maybe for the first time, he finally understood. I didn't need his company. I had my own. And I was going to make it bigger, better, and more meaningful than anything he had ever built. Because this time, I was doing it for me.